All right, welcome back to another episode of this wonderful, fantabulous podcast. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies, a place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. So, without further ado, let's jump right in. So yet again, we are riding solo. This was scheduled at the last minute because apparently she decided to join Elon Musk on Mars. So she's leaving this planet. She said, "I'm out." So we scheduled this at the last minute for Katie, and Nick just couldn't take off. So we apologize. I hope you do leave the light on for us at that Motel 6 on Mars. Please do. We might want to join you. So, all right. So this is the part where we let Katie introduce herself to you.
Awesome. I am Katie Cross, and I love to write girl-powered, freaking awesome fantasy novels. And I do it for a living from my home in the middle of the Colorado mountains currently. That's about to change to Montana. And I have two small kids, 3 dogs, and a husband, but I count him as a kid sometimes. So I'll say I have 3.
All depends on how much laundry he's done lately.
Exactly. Yes, among other things. And I'm a former military spouse because we got out. So this is such a fun podcast. I'm so excited to be here.
I still think moving to Mars sounded cooler than Montana, but we could go with reality, I guess.
It's greener, but there's probably just as much population density.
I know. I was going to say, it might be the same in some ways.
All right. So the second part of the introduction, dear listener and viewer now, because we're on the YouTubes, because we're all hip and with it, as the kids say, how we first met them.
Don't ever know.
I know Cisca. Well, wait, I don't know Cisca. Have you ever heard of Miss Cross before?
No, I have not. So I'm super excited, and we chit-chatted before this, and she seems really awesome and amazing. So I'm really excited, and I will be checking out her books.
I'm actually excited to hear your side of this, JR.
So I actually, when I first started my writing in 2016, I was doing like blogs before I had the podcast, which of course nobody ever read because blogs were already a dying thing back then. Now I just call it a website. But so I was doing this thing. I was trying to make myself stand out. So I said, we're going to do the Warrior Weekend interview. So I was going to interview a bunch of former military that had turned writers. And someone said, hey, why don't you talk to Katie Cross? She was married to the Army, and it's basically the same thing. And so we reached out, and we actually interviewed you, and you went on the website, and I just sort of stayed in touch. And then when my mom read my interview, she bought some of your books from that interview. And so when we switched over after our last co-host had to take a real life, get a real job kind of break from writing, we decided, well, it's a perfect time to transition to fantasy and sci-fi because Cisca is the fantasy literature track director for Dragon Con. It's a small little convention. Some of you listening might have heard of it. And so
JR, your math skills still need work.
A couple thousand, right? I mean, how big can it be?
80,000 plus people. Almost.
I don't have that many fingers and toes. Don't go there. So there's a reason I was in the infantry. But
you don't have that many rounds of ammo either.
How do you know?
Because I know you.
So my mom, when we started doing the fantasy, and I said, well, we're trying to not just do like the action thrillers. We're trying to broaden our base. And she's like, well, if you're going to do fantasy romance, that Katie girl you interviewed, her books are really good. So here we are. And I reached out. I was expecting to schedule you next month or the month after because we try to book in advance so everybody can plan around schedules. And you're like, yeah, I'm getting ready to move. How's Thursday? So here we are.
That sounds like me. Yeah, I'm super efficient that way. So when I found out that when you messaged me and your mom read my books, I was like, I'm so honored. Like, there's something about moms reading and loving my books that just really hits me in the feels. So tell your mom thank you.
My mom is what you would call a whale reader. She can read a book a day.
Oh, yeah.
My mind just doesn't work that fast.
Well, it's funny that she thought of my books as like fantasy romance because I would never have ever categorized that. But I guess I could see it, but I was like, oh, that's surprising.
I guess some of your series are even listed that way on Amazon, so that might be why. Because when we were, they get weird sometimes. I know when we were looking through the ones we were going to talk about today, we saw some that were definitely just modern romance. Or like, sounds interesting because coffee is awesome, but doesn't fit. So that's how we picked. But
So-
everybody that knows Cisca will understand the series we picked when we get there. But yeah, so I found you through the 20 books group when I was looking for veterans in the writing community. And then when we converted over to do fantasy, my mom was like, "You have to interview her." I'm like, "Yes, ma'am."
Yeah, no. He this is how he pitched doing it. Do you want to talk about dragons? Yes, I do want to talk about dragons. Funny you mentioned that. And but I think it's because as a mom, you understand how precious little time moms have. So it's that we took the time to read your book and we liked it and we kept reading. So it really, you know how much that means because you have so much time, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, it's ample.
And my mom is a lot nicer to other authors than she is when she reads my stuff.
That's because she's your mom.
And she is the reason I could never write a romance novel. She's my first line reader. And so in my first series, I wrote a intimate scene between characters because I needed to set up that he had offspring. And Cisca's heard this story. She laughs every time that he had offspring because when you have don't have faster than light travel, you have cryo freezes and time gets wonky. So you could meet your twin brother who's like 40 years older than you. So I wanted to set something up like where he had kids. And that scene, my mom sent it back. She's like, "I don't know what you and your wife are doing, but you need to go back and practice and then rewrite this scene." So that's when I was like, "Yep, not doing it. Not doing it."
You just like scene removed in capital.
Yeah, it got a lot shorter, that scene. A lot more clinical.
Partner, and I'll just write all of those scenes. And when his mom comes back and says that, go, talk to Cisca.
Yeah, that's the Cisca thing. That's not even.
That might be something we have to see, but then emotions and feelings, and I have a shrink, so I don't have to deal with that.
That's fair. That's fair. I have those days too. I'm like, no, I dealt with emotions all day. I don't want to deal with it in my book.
Absolutely. So, Cisca, you get to ask your favorite question.
I do. Speaking of feelings and emotions, because there are some feelings and emotions in these. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
Oh, I'm ready for this because I've listened to other podcasts, and I will say Star Trek, but the Jean-Luc Picard years.
Yes,
the Next Generation. Okay,
that's my love between those three.
And then Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, or Lord of the Rings?
I have to go to Lord of the Rings here, even though I think most of my readers would expect me to pick Potter because my books are so similar, which is part of the reason I don't choose Potter because it's the same sort of reading crowd. But I have such fond memories of diving into Lord of the Rings for the first time. I feel like those books really started opening my eyes to fantasy. So that, and I do love Daenerys and the dragons though. So
but there's a level of nostalgia that just can't really be beat.
Talk about feelings, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
did my shrink call you before this? Is he trying to plan some sort of psyops game on me again?
Who?
My shrink, getting her talking about feelings and stuff.
I don't know. I think you might be reading into it. That might be your paranoia acting up again.
Dang it. Okay.
Okay. But which one was your first love, sci-fi or fantasy?
Definitely fantasy. Yeah, dragons, fantasy. I didn't really develop a love for sci-fi until my more adult years. I will always remember reading Dune for the first time. And then there's one other sci-fi author, G.S. Jensen. I follow her religiously and I buy and read all of her books. But for the most part, I'm pretty stuck in fantasy.
I can get that.
So what is it about dragons that you really like?
What is not to like?
So, yeah, really the question is on you. I think
what's your problem, JR?
I've analyzed this a lot, actually. Why do we love dragons? And I've talked to my readers about it a lot. And it almost always comes down to power and relationship or connection. There's just something about your bestie being a dragon. You can't get over that, right?
No. And they are always good. They never have traffic.
Right.
This is true. But I always think of dragons because they're lizard-like as sort of less than emotional. So if I think of magical creatures, I'm a werewolf.
I got some books you should read.
Just okay, maybe we can expand my horizons with books and stuff. But
we can go for classic literature or modern literature. Which one do you want?
We'll talk offline. But so for me, I always think of the fur creatures as the ones that are more emotive and so I don't know, that's probably where I would go.
That's fair. I mean, I have 3 dogs, so I kind of get what you're going with there, but my dogs don't breathe fire. So, like, and not all
That
my
you
dragons
know of.
fire, but the whole flight, I don't know. I think there's something in the power thing. But yeah, scales aren't super cuddly.
I think also that dragons are just so universal. Like they're cross-culturally.
Cultural. I was gonna say, like, if you look back through history, like dragons are represented in so many different cultures in different ways, which is really fun.
Yeah, I had a friend who tried drunkenly making the argument that that meant dragons had to have been real at some point.
Okay.
They were drunk. It was a convention. It was 2 a.m.
No judgment. No judgment.
No
So,
judgment.
so what is it that you love about fantasy as a genre?
I love the idea that anything is possible, like through magic. But I then love to challenge the idea that we need magic to make anything possible, right? So it is fun to like have spells and incantations that do my dishes, which is absolutely what my magic would be doing, is my dishes and cleaning my house. But at the same time, in within that world of magic, I like to challenge the idea of, yeah, magic makes anything happen, but actually we hold the magic, so we actually make those things happen. And I think that's like a fun kind of dichotomy to explore.
So what was your first memory of fantasy as a genre? Was there a game? Was it reading Lord of the Rings? What do you think what do you remember as your first experience with fantasy?
You know, I think it was the book The Last Unicorn.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, he got the rights back to the book now.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it just happened like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, that's amazing. I just remember I was totally that. Like, I think so many people listening to this are going to understand. I was that kid that just escaped into books, right? Like, whatever was going on in my life, good or bad, I was in a book all the time. And I remember staying up late with a flashlight in my bed
Yes.
to finish The Last Unicorn. And I just loved that book so much. And I think I loved that idea of anything being possible. And so I just I read everything, but it was always the fantasy that I was drawn to. When I wrote my first fantasy series, I wasn't heavily reading fantasy, but it's like my subconscious just took me right there. It's pretty cool.
So kids these days, and I know this people, that's how it always starts, with shaking your fist at the sky and get off my lawn, but like they don't understand, like with the paperback book and a flashlight that's getting hot in the crook of your neck as you're trying to hide under the covers, dying from like heat stroke in a southern summer because you want to know how that dang book ends. Now they got the backlit Kindle, and
you're so engrossed in the book, and so your parents like sneak up on you, and you're like, you're all in trouble. No. My best friend finally told my mom one time, "Oh, if you really want to punish her, just take away her books."
That's evil.
I don't know if I could.
I did not have a very good reaction when he let slip that he was the one who told my mother that. He did not have a black eye, but he was a little sore later.
I put my son to bed early sometimes, and then I say, pick 3 books. You can take him to bed with you, and he has a headlamp. And so he wears the headlamp and
so he knows
in bed at night. So, but also I want him to just have that bond with books. So I'm like, you can't have toys, but you can have books with you in bed to use with your flashlight. Because I just want him to form like that immediate instinctive kind of attachment to books. So I have created that for my son. But
outstanding.
Like once he gets older, I don't know that he'll still do it anymore. It depends on, what he has and what the world looks like. But at least he'll have the early memories because it's so
fun. I remember thinking whoever invented the light that clips onto your book was a freaking genius, because I didn't have that big honking like flashlight in the crook of your neck anymore. And
I wish I'd had a mag light then that you can like take the top
off.
Oh,
see, you guys are like spoiled because my mom like gathered up all of the flashlights. So I didn't have a flashlight. I had to stuff like a blanket at the bottom of my door, which is why I finally learned to sleep with my door closed. Was because that way if I slept with it closed always, they wouldn't know that I was cheating and not sleeping, and then like shove stuff underneath so that none of the light seeped out.
So my mom would try to take the flashlights, but she never got all of them. See?
Okay, you weren't ADHD enough. See, I lost them. I found like flashlights for years after I finally.
All right, so. How did your love of reading all these great books and hiding under blankets, sweating your backside off in the summer, how did that transition into you writing novels in it?
I mean, it created the instinct to always find story. right? So I think I just got used to constantly seeking and hiding in stories. So by the time I was in first grade, I would get these journals and I would just like write these stories out. I remember like writing stories out like that. Oh, this is like happening in first grade. I'd give a story that happened on the playground and I'd write it out. So I think to me, I just created like an escape plan into story. It wasn't just books, it was story. And so I just was constantly coming up with story ideas. And then as I grew older and I like had computer access and could type, you know, I would write more. And even in high school, my best friend Brianna actually told me one day when I like first announced I was publishing, she's like, I'm not that surprised. You were always writing. But I was like, I always hid it from everyone. Like for some reason it was like mine. I didn't want anybody to know I wrote. It was very special. So like Brianna would come over, I just turned the computer screen off and just leave it. And I wouldn't let her see what I was doing. And no one read my stuff. So I didn't know that she knew what I was doing. So I thought, oh, of course she did. Like obviously wasn't that smart about it. But I just always leaned on it. So when I eventually ended up making it a career, it felt so natural because I was always finding that escape in story, I think.
So when given that was your feeling as a kid with with your writing and keeping it to yourself, do you still get a little squiggy about knowing your friends are actually going to read it because you know them?
Not really. Like I've launched so many books at this point that I'm just like I'm already on to the next book. Let that one go. Like I mean, I still like to get feedback to see like, you know, I might launch a like book with a slightly different main character to see what my reader response is because my readers tend to have a specific track that they really like to read, but I like to challenge that track. So I'll listen to feedback then, but for the most part, I worked over that hurdle and I've just moved on.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So many authors let their own real life experiences influences the stories they tell. So were there any specific formidable moments that really sort of shaped you as a storyteller?
Um, probably so many of them, right? But the one that sticks out the most is actually my experience as a military spouse shaped my first novel. And I didn't realize it at the time. So my husband, I always say I was born into the Army life, like at Fort Campbell in Clarksville. He was at 101st. He'd just gotten off a year in Afghanistan um, when we met and we got married, and it was all kind of fast. So I like started there, and that was fine. But I everyone's like, well, he's going to be gone for your birthday and for anniversaries, and you'll have to spend a lot of time apart. And I was like, I got this. Like, I'm an independent woman. Like, that's fine. Like, as long as he doesn't do anything stupid, crazy, and die, then we'll figure it out. But then I like got into military life, and no one had told me that my career was going to bomb. I was a nurse. Like, I was a charge nurse, a pediatric nurse, and my career was swept out from under me because there was nowhere for me to work because we were moving so much. So he was in 101st as a first lieutenant, and then he got into the Special Forces pipeline after selection. So we ended up moving a bunch as he did just a bunch of different training. And I was writing my first book as he was finishing up selection, and I was kind of putting it into the world. And later I looked back and I realized I was trying to process what could happen, like what my life would be like as a military spouse to a Green Beret, and what could happen in our life through the way I shaped that story. Because my main character, Bianca, has a father named Derek that is a protector, which is like the elite guardians of her network where she lives. He's gone a lot. She doesn't always know where he is. He's sometimes injured, and he tries to be a really good dad from afar. And her mom is constantly like alone, but loves him anyway. You know, so I looked back and realized, oh my gosh, like I was just trying to figure my stuff out by writing this book. It's like, I don't know if I would have written the same book if I wasn't married to my husband, which is so interesting to me.
Now, was that the Miss Mabel's story?
Yeah. Yeah, that's Miss Mabel's. So that was my first series. And then the Dragon Master trilogy that your mom read came after that, but happens before it. This is a little Star
So it's a prequel trilogy.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, it depends on how you look at it.
Okay. So now, do you still tell people to go into your worlds through Miss Mabel, or are they all independent at this point?
I've asked readers that have read all of them, and in general, they say they like it better chronologically. But I keep writing books that happened before all these other ones. So I don't know like how that.
Just you're modeling after Mercedes Lackey. She did the same thing.
Absolutely.
Arrows of the Queen happened in what would nominally be called present day Valdemar.
Mm-hmm.
But then, and that was her first novel. And then she wrote all these other ones way before that. And then all these ones. And now she's even writing the Collegium novels, which are somewhere in between.
Yeah.
I mean,
it is sort of hodgepodge, but like in 10 years, no one's going to care because they're just going to read straight through. So I'm good with it.
So you mentioned obviously that you were married to the military and how that affected your first novel. So how do you feel like your time affiliated with the armed forces affects the stories you tell instead of just that first one, just in general sense?
Yeah. I mean, I tend to always have some sort of like military-esque, not necessarily feel to the book, but there's like strategy or battle or some sort of movement. I mean, there's so many times where I've like texted my husband and like, can you help me plan a war tonight? Or like, seriously. And actually,
yes, this is so cool.
Yeah, well, he's like, he helps with it, but he's just so used to it now. I don't think he thinks of it. But one time he was on like a deployment and I had this deadline coming up and I really needed help with this battle scene. And so I actually like Facebook messaged, I think one of his, like the sergeants that he'd worked with. And I was like, hey, so Jordan's gone. I really need help with like this battle scene. And Rooney's like, hell yeah, this is awesome. So over Facebook, like one of Jordan's, like, I can't remember if he's a sergeant, what he was, but he like helped me plan out this like war scene. It's pretty cool. I think there's always some element of like strategy and that sort of stuff that kind of comes into it that I think being a military spouse brings about. But more than that, I think I am really focused on like girl power fantasy is what I call it, where the women like are handling business. Not that the men are involved or
no,
whatever, but just
I mean, I've been both a soldier and as well as a military spouse, and it's different, but it's a certain level of you have to be tough and you have to do the shit.
You have to figure it out. Right?
Yeah.
Like I feel like that was just always the lesson that I really got from being a military spouse is, well, figure it out. Like who's gonna save you? You know, like they're gone. You like I would have times where I didn't hear from my husband for like 3 weeks.
And
So
you have to kind of respect that because there's a reason why, and you can't really distract them. Like you have to figure it out and reliably because they are busy doing things that if they get distracted can cost lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's not a lot.
Sometimes I think the hard part was you have to figure it out and then maybe talk about it way later. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
I can't imagine.
Happened. Wasn't a big deal. I just thought I'd tell you later so you weren't worried about it. You know?
Oh no. I one time had that and they were, why didn't you tell me? I forgot. I mean, I really had forgotten that it was had been an issue.
Yeah.
I forgot. I sorry.
So I don't imagine that the Shrinking Violet type those marriages last very long when you're at a high deployment tempo. Maybe back in the peacetime in the 80s when it was just the Cold War, and you were in the right unit, maybe that could have worked. But yeah, I don't see that lasting in the modern era. So, do you ever draw on people you knew either through the family readiness groups or through actual service members that were affiliated with your husband's units when you write?
My husband, I tend to draw from him just because I'm crazy about him. But I actually, like, we decided that I wouldn't be involved in the FRG or actually really in his team. By the time we made it to team life, with where we were, it was just better if I didn't make friends with the wives. And then I didn't put him in awkward positions. So like for the wives to approach him about their husbands on deployment. So I actually didn't really interact with the FRG at all. We had like friends in our neighborhood that were obviously like in the military and we were close with them. But I would say the really only person I can think of that I probably drew from our military was just one of my friends. She was a team spouse also on a different, her husband wasn't working directly with my husband, but she was actually my villain, but not because she like not because she's a bad person. She's like one of the best people I've ever met. But she just looked like how I wanted my villain to look because she's beautiful, like just this beautiful, amazing, confident woman. And I was like, that is my bad guy. And so I told her about it like years after I published the book. And she was like, that's hysterical. She thought it was the funniest thing ever. Other than that, I haven't really like pulled much because we never lived on post. Like we really tried to create a life outside of the military bubble to have a separation kind of.
Okay. So we talked about how the military life affected the stories you write, but does it affect like that experience shape the kind of stories you like to read now?
I think so. Just because I saw a total different side to the world. And so I'm way more inclined to pick up like faster action, like thriller kind of stuff on some days where my husband and I can like discuss it or, like that kind of stuff. But I read so widely that I wouldn't say it pushed me into a new thing I never had before. I think I just love it all.
I think most people that end up being writers tend to be very widely read.
Hopefully. Yeah.
I don't know that most, well, not to say that most readers, I know a lot of readers are very loyal to the genres they like. Whereas I know a lot of the people that are actually producing those books they like read everything and anything.
But I think that's because good authors need a variety of tools in their box and things going on. But transferring from, you mentioned fans. So I disagree with JR a little bit on that, but that's fine. I think that's a modern marketing technique that people are using and convince themselves work. But have you had any crazy fan interactions? Like, what's your funniest fan interaction?
I was doing a book signing in Denver, and this like 7-year-old girl came up to me. Her parents had seen my announcement and brought her and her like 10-year-old sister, and she's carrying Miss Mabel's School for Girls. And she walks up to me and she goes, so Miss Mabel is my villain. She goes, Miss Mabel is vile, and just like hands me the book. And I was like, did she just say vile? And I like looked at her dad, and he just was like kind of embarrassed and like shrugged. And I'm like, way to go, Dad. I can't believe, I was like, how old is she? Like, she's so little. She's like 7. She'd read my book and she's like, Miss Mabel is vile. She just like hands me the book, and I was so impressed. I was like, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, Dad. She's awesome.
That is great.
I thought that was so fun. That was probably my favorite fan interaction I've had.
So have you gotten any cosplays or cool fan art?
Yeah, I get fan art pretty often.
That's
I've
awesome.
had some cosplays, not very much. Like every now and then people send me pictures. I've had one guy started doing some fan fiction. I've had people like send in art. I had another friend that was an author that just loves graphic design. He started doing like 3D pictures of my people. So over the years, like it'll come in and we'll kind of share it on social media if we have permission.
That's awesome.
Really crazy. Yeah.
Has anyone away from book signings or conventions asked for your autograph out in public and been like, oh my gosh, it's you?
No, not yet. I told my husband that I have to, my goal, and it's awful now with COVID, my goal is to be walking through an airport one day and like just see someone reading one of my books, like in the airport or on an airplane. And then I just want to talk to them about it without them knowing who I am. Like,
that seems to be the goal of many an author. Larry Correa and Robert Ross have both said they deliberately insult themselves to see what the reader will say.
So the reader has to defend them to them?
Like,
awesome.
Such a backward way to fish for compliments.
Well, see, nowadays with everyone reading so much digitally, it's like you almost have to kind of get all up in their business to see what they're reading anyway.
Yeah, that's never going to happen in this post-COVID world or COVID world. Because
I did have one girl like approach me at church one day. Like I was at church and I was getting up to leave, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I've read all your books. I love them so much." And she was like telling me all about them, and I was like, "Hi." Like I hadn't met her. She was like the sister of a friend, but I don't know if she knew that like we were at church together. Anyway, that was pretty funny.
I don't think she knew she was at a church.
Well, it's just like I think my friend recommended my books to her, but she didn't know that like she knew me. You know, she's a really good book. So she told her, is her sister-in-law, so her sister-in-law read them and was sharing them with everyone else. And then she saw me at church, and she's like, "You got to church with her?" Like I think she was just she didn't know there was a connection.
Your dog's having fun.
Yeah, sorry, just a second.
I think genre is a thing, and you are wrong. So now that she's back, we can go back to
Genre
talking
is
to
a
our
thing.
guests.
Subgenres and subgenres are a little ridiculous.
All right, we'll continue
So
this on
that is the
Ask Us
result of
Anything.
OCD marketing and special flowerness. But sorry, JR wanted to pick a fight. So tell us everything you have written, or the highlights of what you want to tell us.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a fantasy focused podcast, so we'll start there, but I have some other stuff. So I have the network series is four or five books. That's the series that started it all. Then the Dragon Master trilogy comes before that chronologically, but I wrote it after. And then I just launched in March the historical collection, which is my third fantasy series. And that's a whole bunch of standalone novels that take place at like different times in my world. So like 500 years before the network series, just after, just before. So it's people that I've mentioned in the course of my books. And then I just do a standalone novel on them. And then I have like chick lit series that has nothing to do with fantasy. That was kind of an accident. That has 5 books. And then I just started a new romance series last year that's sort of taking off. So I have 5 series right now.
So when we talk marketing, when I talk with other authors, she's always one of the examples I give. So she wrote a character that was a chef. So she paired with a chef for a marketing thing to have them write a cookbook that's co-written by her character. Like that level of guerrilla marketing is genius.
So
I wish I thought of it.
It's my chicklet series, and it's all based on like food. Basically, a lot of it is women and their relationship with themselves or food. Like food comes into that. So I had a friend that was a food blogger, and I was like, "Would you want to do like a cookbook? And we'll just center it around my series, so I'll pay for all the production." And she's like, "Yes." So we just made this cookbook together. It was really fun.
Well, see, JR, the problem with that kind of marketing scheme is you can't cook.
Well, I didn't say it'd be cookbook exactly, but the idea was kind of genius. So anyway, all right.
Bigger. It's okay.
It's all good.
So while those all sound fascinating, as we mentioned, Cisca loves dragons. So and my mom liked Dragon Master. So that's what we're going to talk about, specifically book 1, Flame. So where did you get the premise for this universe? How did you come up with the idea? Was it psychedelics, Ouija board? Did you climb too high in those gorgeous Colorado mountain ranges and air get too low for you?
It's definitely the high altitude here. We're at like 7,500 feet, so I don't need psychedelics. Because it piggybacked a little bit off the network series, I had somewhat of the setting, but actually it really takes place away from the network series. It's the same like geographic location, but it takes place deep in my magical forest, which is called Leadham Wood. And then throughout, so it felt like I was creating a new universe, and I just love living in the mountains. Like, we are extremely active outdoor people. We hike every day because we have 3 really high energy dogs. And so we take them in the national forest and we just go off trail and we'll just walk for like an hour and a half and make it back. So we're just mountain people and really active. So I created Leadham Wood because it's the forest that I want. Like, it has bigger than the redwoods trees. Like, it has dragons. It has everything you can imagine, which maybe wouldn't be so fun if you can't do magic. So I based the Dragon Master trilogy out of there because I really wanted to focus my forest dragons specifically in this Leadham Wood. So I put them there also because it's a world that's rife with conflict, right? When you have a forest that magical and there are terrible creatures there, then anything could happen. So it made it almost simple to kind of stage it.
Okay, so now you just need a magical what's that guy with the print? Robin Hood. There we go. That would be kind of cool in that setting. That's what I was picturing.
Bad idea. A different kind of Sherwood forest.
Yeah, like living up in the trees, like in the movie. All right. So before we dig in to talk about the novel itself, let's talk about the art that you chose. So I'm going to share that cover. I'm going to have that prepped. So how did you come up with the design for this? Because this is not, when you think romance or even fantasy, what I think of as a cover. You went very
there's
simple.
some fantasy novels that do covers very much like that because it kind of looks like a grimoire.
So yeah, that's exactly it. So I mean, there is an element of romance in this series. It takes 3 books to fully flesh out, and there's only 1 romance. So I definitely wasn't going to do any production around a romantic theme because it's not like a main point of the book. It's more of an action adventure fantasy. But the whole goal of because all my book covers have some sort of look just like this for my fantasy. And the whole thing is I wanted it to look like an old magical book. So none of that is me. That is all my graphic designer, Jenny Zamanek. She runs Seedlings Design Online, or Seedlings Online. That is all her. At this point, she and I have done probably like 50 book covers together. So at this point, I just tell her, here's the title. Let's try this color. This is what it's about. And she just comes up with stuff, and then I review it, and she pretty much nails that out. So I think for this one, I told her, hey, let's keep tones of green. I want the title banner, is what we call it, where it says the Dragon Master Trilogy in flame. I said it's dragons in the forest. She normally does a texture on the back. You can see the leaves. On Miss Mabel for girls, it's like it looks like kind of like leather. In the High Priestess that we just did, it looks like cloth. So she'll have a texture in the background, and then just use these kind of bright colors to pull the stuff out. So I can't claim any of that genius. That's just Jenny.
Well, this must be where my colorblindness gets in the way. I don't see any leaves, but anyway, well, it's a pretty cover, and so now we know the story. And I will link to the Seedlings website. So if you like that work, you can reach out and tell her how awesome she is. So, what would be the 30-second elevator speech of this novel?
So in Amgui, in Leadham Wood, dragons are the rulers and the witches are the servants, until 2 sisters decide to topple the status quo.
Very succinct. I dig it. You kept it under 30 seconds. I am most impressed.
I have to practice those sometimes, though. That one I just came up with, but I have to usually practice them.
It did not feel like it was a seat of the pants type thing. So you did a good job.
It totally was.
You totally pulled it off. You nailed it. So next time you do it, though, you got to practice and see if you can deepen your voice and do it in the movie trailer voice, which I obviously can't do either.
No, that's why we have Nick. He does it in the movie trailer voice.
Yeah, he does the voices for us. Maybe because he hears the voices. I don't know. So
it's all the sugar he eats.
Yeah, it's a running joke since he's a ICE officer that he lives on donuts.
Oh, yeah. There you
go. So what is it that makes this series special?
I think it's not just, I mean, for any dragon series, you need that deep connection between dragon rider and dragon, right? I think to really drive that home to the readers that want their dragons a specific way. Sana is my character that bonds deeply with her dragon Ludius. That is really one of the strongest characteristics. They go for it's like enemies to lovers romance almost, where Sana and Ludius meet and they sort of hate each other, and then they kind of grow together and become really connected as dragon rider and dragon. And then so much of it is just turning upside down this idea that humans have some power over these massive creatures, right? Like humans are in charge just because they ride them. I wanted to sort of switch that dynamic around and say, well, what if the dragons were sort of the taskmasters and the witches served the dragons until like they found a way to be equal again? And I think that's a very different approach I haven't seen much.
So what tropes do you think you really hit on particularly? And did you use like the dragons have long lives trope?
It depends on what you consider a long life. Like my dragons average 150 to 200 years.
Well, that's longer than JR is going to make.
Hopefully it's longer than me. I'm trying to think. I think really the dragon rider dragon connection was a big trope. The dragons live longer than like the humans is another one. I don't say necessarily like treasure, like dragons aren't seeking treasure in my world, but they are drawn to power. So when they sense magical power in a witch, they're drawn to that witch more, and they don't hoard anything, but they intensely dislike witches unless you're sort of in. They have a natural sort of distrust for witches, and then, breathing fire and they're really hot, that kind of stuff. My dragons are all black, so they all have black scales, but then they have marbled color running through it in different designs because I wanted it to be a little different that way. So they could kind of fade into the forest if they needed to because of their color, but they could be distinguished by the marbled color running.
Cool.
So JR loves to have me ask, what subgenres do you think your book fits into?
Because you love subgenres.
I
She's
love
so
them.
bossy.
I mean, I think fantasy, like adventure, action, adventure, dragons. I feel like that maybe that's a subgenre. I don't know, like what you categorize as genre versus.
I don't know. I don't spend that much time shopping for books on Amazon.
Yeah,
She's
I
a
mean,
Barnes and Noble girl.
I am.
You could certainly say that there's like a romantic element, a subgenre in it, because there is a slow burn romance through the 3 books. Mostly it's just focused on that sort of medieval world, high fantasy-esque kind of thing, I guess.
So on to the story itself. Can you tell us a bit about the main character and what makes that main character so unique and special?
Yeah, so there are 2. So Sana and Isadora are called sister witches, which is basically just another phrase for twins. And they grew up basically in a commune where the dragons were their leaders, and they existed solely to serve the dragons as servants. And Isadora starts having headaches that they can't take care of. She's never wanted to serve the dragons. She really thinks they're nasty, scaly lizards, and she wants out. Like, they've never been away from their small village in the forest, so they've never really left. And Isadora wants out, but Sana's drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak. So Sana, she wants the best dragon to train her to be a good servant. Like, she wants to be the dragon master, which is what her Dade, which is her father, basically. Her Dade is the high dragon master that communicates with the dragons through touch. So Sana wants to be the dragon master, and Isadora wants out. And then there's this big event that happens that forces them onto different paths.
Okay. So a lot of fantasy novels draw from a lot of European culture. Did you go that route for the universe when you built it, or did you mix up all of the different sort of global, or did you create something entirely new?
So I tried to create something new while drawing on different influences. So in my world, instead of it's one continent is Alcara, and then instead of countries, they're called networks. So the Central Network is probably a little more European-esque, but the Southern Network is more influenced by like a Slavic culture. The Eastern Network is more of like a Mediterranean. The Western Network is a desert, and the Northern Network is like a mountainous Tibetan kind of world. So I tried to pull from everywhere, but not focus that, right? So I have like the silk trade that grows through magic in the Southern Network, which is like Antarctica. So I tried to like pull different themes and different ideas from different parts of our world and create something new.
That's really cool. So, so we've talked about the world kind of as its own unique character, but how about any secondary characters that kind of stand out as you really need to check this one out?
The dragons, right? I mean, I hate to say that they're secondary characters because they're sort of the main characters also, but I think the funnest part of the Dragon Master trilogy is how the dragons lay out and the effects they have on the world, because you see both forest dragons and mountain dragons and desert dragons and how they all come together after never having known each other before. So watching different races of dragons come together is really fun.
Now, were the mountain dragons gray because the blending in there versus like a tan color for the desert and stuff?
Yeah, so the mountain dragons are more of a grayish kind of rock so that they can blend in. The forest dragons are that dark so they can blend in. The sea dragons are pretty much snakes, just ginormous snakes. And then the desert dragons have more of like an earthy feel. And then all of them, but the desert dragons, have some magical ability. So like the mountain dragons can transport from one place to another. The forest dragons can communicate. And the forest dragons can do dragons if their dragon rider is like sort of the channel for it.
Cool.
So, do you have any bad guys?
Any bad guys?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so many. I'd be like a super boring series without them. So in Flame, the bad guy is the dragon that's like keeping basically the dragon riders oppressed in order to remain in control. His name is Talus. And then as the trilogy goes on, there's bigger bads that kind of you start small, and then there's bigger bads that kind of grow out into this big kind of world conflict in the third book.
Very
Okay, that sounds interesting. So we know that as authors, we do horrible, nasty, dirty, rotten things to our characters because it makes a good story. Because if I woke up and nothing went wrong, it's kind of a boring story. So
Yeah.
if your characters met you in a dark alley one night, how badly would this go for you?
It depends on the character. Sana would probably attack me with her dragon for sure. Isadora, she has a little more perspective. I think she'd be upset about a few things, but she figured out in the end. Bianca is the one that I would probably fear the most, but she's the most like me, so maybe that's why.
Okay, so now we're going to ask a little bit of looking behind the curtain at how the sausage is made. Were there any super cool scenes or elements of the story that were cut that maybe you'll use later, or that you thought were cool but for whatever reason just didn't fit the story?
Yeah, so there are tons of those, and I've turned them into books of short stories that readers can buy. So
Oh, that's awesome.
I just repurposed all this content. One year when I was first writing Miss Mabel's, NaNoWriMo came up, and I'd never done it before because I was just kind of starting into this. And for NaNoWriMo, I just wrote all the backstories of all my secondary characters away from Bianca. And then I wrote out portions of Bianca's life. So I kind of knew in my head how they went down before I launched the book. And I ended up getting so much feedback from readers on the characters that they loved that I just launched different collections of short stories at different times with those short stories in it for readers to leave. And it's still something that they love having now.
I have a friend who just realized she started to write a book, and then she's like, I actually have the short story I have to finish writing first because things in that affect this. Oops.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes I just do it like to keep up. It's more of a marketing tactic almost than anything. I mean, I want my readers to have more of the stories that they love, but if I had to push off a launch and I have more months than I wanted between launches, then I'll push a short story out just to kind of give them something to read and stay top of mind. Or I did a short story as a Black Friday only deal to my readers for 99 cents because I sell through my own store online, and so I can pivot super fast. I don't have to pull on and off from Amazon if I want to do that stuff. So they're fun to write, they're fun for the readers to have, and they're like a really interesting marketing strategy.
Okay, so the Flame is clearly part of a series, the Dragon Master Trilogy. I know because it says so on Amazon. And Trilogy, like the name implies, is 3 books. But is their story done? Could there be more from these characters? Could you scratch out Trilogy and write quadrilogy or more?
Definitely. So one of the biggest things I've heard, I launched the final book in the Dragon Master Trilogy last year. It was called Freedom. And probably the biggest thing I've been hearing from readers is to bridge the gap. So we have the network series that I started with, and then the Dragon Master Trilogy, and there's about 100 years in between the two before the network series actually happens chronologically. And I've had a ton of people say they just want to bridge with the struggles of Sana and Isadora after the end of the Dragon Master Trilogy. So I have this book that will be part of the historical collection that's called The Advocate, that really based on requests from readers I've decided to write, and that will kind of help pull them back into that same world with a new storyline and something different. So I'm excited about that.
So you have 3 series right now and a bunch of short content in the same universe. So how do you keep track of all that?
I hired a VA, and I named her my title manager, and I created standard operating procedures for her to help me manage my titles across all of the retailers. So I have my Shopify store, that's katiecrossbooks.com, and then we have Amazon, Kobo, Draft to Digital, Google Play, Ingram Spark, and then all the audiobook stuff like Findaway Voices and ACX and FM, like transistor.fm and BookFunnel. There's all of those ones. So I've trained McKenna's her name. I've trained McKenna to manage my titles, and there's like a certain checklist she has every week or month, or when I finish writing a book, we have a production that it then goes into, and McKenna kind of helps me manage the steps in that production. I taught her how to use Vellum, so I have someone else that manages the production side of that, so I can just keep writing.
No, I actually It's awesome. We should all get there one day. But no, I was actually asking more for like the universe is expansive. It sounds like there's several epochs and eras, and so like, do you have like a universe Bible? Do you just keep it all in your head?
So I'm not like a super detail oriented person unless I'm in a novel, and then I like to check details. Otherwise, they kind of tire me. So I wish that I had created like Universe Bible that I could like consult and like build up all the time. I haven't. So I have two guys that are part of my team that have been putting a wiki up for me, and what I've been doing is just creating like a document for each book where I have a timeline and details and that kind of thing, and I send it to them and they put it up on the wiki. And I might say to them, hey, like, what was that magic system's name in the High Priest Daughter? And it ended with AN. And they'll like go look for it, or McKenna will just do a vellum search for me, or. So when I sort of need a track of that stuff, I just kind of call on other members of my team to help me. But we've also like kind of, so through the wiki, we're starting to create like a resource that I can kind of have access to all those. And then I'm trying to create a more internal one that I can have the other details we're not putting on the wiki. It's a slow process when you don't start it from the beginning. Like it's a lot to like update that and keep it going. And that just feels overwhelming to me. So I never did it. And now I just have like on one of my screens, my computer, I have 4 PDFs pulled up where I've been fact checking. As I write my next book, I've been fact checking from my other series. So it's not my cleanest system.
Okay. I just always fast. I know some people still keep it all in their head and they have no intention of doing otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah,
My
I know.
memory is Swiss cheese. So
I know somebody who she has a company, and that's some of what she does is she will read the books and make your Bible.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what Mike and Evan, my two guys, are doing. Mike
Yeah.
is reading my books and
Well,
taking
and Weber has an entire fandom organization called Bew Peers or Bureau 9 or something like that. They're going to hunt me down and slaughter me because I never remember their names. I don't. And I look at them and I'm like, why? I'll run into them and they're like, well, I'm in this group. And I'm like, why does that sound familiar? And they're like, seriously? And they get all upset. And I'm like,
it's
I
kind of
hope
like
you're
you
not going to yell at me
react.
so hard.
It's kind of like your reaction when I remind you that Pern is fantasy. But now you get to ask your
Stop
super.
the heresy. It is April 1st. Stop the heresy.
So now it's your turn to ask your other favorite question, which she actually really likes this one. So
I do really like this one. That's what he likes to give them to me in groups and balance them out. So so we all know that the world needs some consistency. So what sort of magic would you take from this and keep for you in real life?
Oh, like from my world, what magic
Yeah,
would I
like what magic? Like, is there a favorite spell? Like something.
Honestly, any magic that cleans my house or makes dinner. Like in a second, I would take all of that. like I don't even care about flying or transportation. Bianca has a flying carpet that might be cool, but I think I just want something to make dinner and clean my house.
I totally get it. So is there like, because you mentioned magic, so do you have multiple magic systems in this universe?
Yeah, so in my universe, what basically how it's a little bit like Zeusy in that I have goddesses and then I have gods, and they're on different sides of this entire world. And Alkara is where the goddesses kind of rule. The goddesses basically spend their time creating magic, which shows up in grimoires, and they allow the witches to use their magic systems. So the magic system in the network series is the Marin magic system. The magic system for the dragons is like the Dragon Master magic, basically. And so Bianca, like, and Isadora and Sana can pull from different grimoires and learn the spells and incantations and be able to do those magic systems. The gods rule over the mortals who don't have any magical ability. So that hijinks ensue. So there really is different magical systems. So there might be a grimoire that shows up that's all about gardening,
House cleaning,
or laundry, or like transportation, or something more complicated like transformation. There's different types of magical spells, so that you can have familiar magic that everyone kind of knows and expects, or you might find this random grimoire somewhere and then learn this magic no one knows about and have like an advantage.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, how would you abuse it if you had it in real life?
How would I abuse it?
Yeah.
The magic.
The magic.
Oh, probably.
I would totally like move randomly without being in the room, stuff on my sister's desk because she's super OCD about it. Like, I don't know how that picture moved to the opposite side of your desk.
Yeah, I think. Oh gosh, I don't even think I've thought of abusing magic. I would honestly probably somehow again just like use it to my advantage, so I don't have to do much as much around my house. I'll have to think about that question. That's a good one. I think it would be fun to play pranks on my husband, kind of like you were talking about with your sister. I think that could be kind of fun, or just like travel all over the world in a matter of seconds. So put my kids to bed and then go lay on the beach for an hour or two, come back. That'd be pretty awesome.
Now, if he
You never come back.
If he had the magic, would he play pranks on you in return?
Oh, he'd be gone. No, I'm just kidding. He would totally play the pranks on me if he had magic. It would be a disaster. And yeah, I think he'd play pranks on a bunch of his friends too, I can imagine.
All right.
So,
Go ahead. I was going to remind you, this is your most favorite question we have just for you.
Making the fantastic creatures. Like, how did you go about the concept behind how you made them? Was it whole cloth? Did you just kind of stare at chameleons? I don't know what.
The dragons. I mean, it's super anticlimactic, but I think there was just a lot of staring at my computer. Like, well, crap! I need a creature that sort of serves this purpose and is fearsome in this way. And there's a creature I made called the Balua, and it's an eye. It doesn't have eyes, and it lives in the trees. The dirt burns its skin, and it looks really mottled, and it has like purple, like acidic spit. The Balua came about like in stages, so I was like, well, I normally go to Google and I do English to Latin, and then I just type in different English words and see what the Latin counter is, and then I'll just form the word off that. So all of my dragons end in is, like Latin words. So that's kind of how I would name the creatures. And then I would just kind of come up with them as the story progressed. So I had this Balua, and then as I wrote, they were just always in the trees. And so I decided to make a rule that they couldn't touch the ground. And then I had one fall and touch the ground, and it was like burning, the dirt was burning its skin. The dragons, I sort of played around with just different ideas, and honestly, Pinterest, like I'd go to Pinterest and find different dragon pictures, and like, I like that about that dragon. I don't like that. And so I kind of sketched out like a rough dragon sketch for what I thought and how I wanted to make them different after I was like reading all the different books of dragons. How can I make them different in my world? So a lot of it was just, I call it layering. I say that writing is just like an onion. Like there are just layers to everything, and it all just kind of builds over time and layer after layer after layer. So even my magical creatures are that way. I start with a basic idea, and then I just develop it in form as I'm writing, or like thinking it out, or just staring into the distance. I think a lot of the time because I work from my kitchen table most of the time, I'll just be like staring at something. And I think sometimes I do it for an awkward amount of time, because my husband's like used to it. So he'll leave me, and like, it'll be like, I'll come out of it and it'll be like 20 minutes later, or I'm like, oh my gosh, I figured it out. And I'll just be all excited. Or sometimes I'll just like walk around my kitchen island as I'm just like thinking, but it's like awkward if other people are at my house. They're like, is she okay?
I can understand that.
Yeah.
I have done that with chemistry problems. And my son one time looked at me, and he looked at actually his friend, because they were over, they were playing, and I'm doing homework, and I'm like, and I said something in lieu of a cuss word, and he like looks over, and my son just goes, she's just like that.
So you mentioned that.
Thanks, kid.
Oh, that's hysterical.
I mean, my youngest thought I fought dinosaurs in the war, so I mean, it could have been worse.
That's
How old do you think I am? But so you mentioned you sketched out the dragons when you were looking at the various Pinterest boards. Now, when you say sketched out, do you mean like you actually drew a picture, or did you just sketch it in your mind with words?
Oh, I just drew a very ugly, like here's how tall the dragon would look in comparison to the witch. you know, like,
Right.
how do I measure that? And I want there to have like, okay, maybe there's like horns on the head, but it wasn't in depth. I just mostly was trying to just get a feel for what does this actually look like? And so how can I write these proportions, you know? So I typically have like witch height. Like that dragon is like 12 witches from floor to top of the neck type thing. Um, so it's just a very rough, like akin to like stick figures drawing, and then just looking at the pictures and trying to figure out, well, the males look like this, the females look like this. What, like, how can a lizard have a more feminine appearance, and what does a feminine appearance look like for a lizard? Right? Is it the same as like, are there parallels to humans? Like the weird questions you would never think you have to figure out, right? Like so weird. It's like I can't believe I do for a living. People think I'm crazy.
Okay, what is the weirdest thing you have had to Google doing this?
Probably
That you can admit on family-friendly radio.
Yeah.
Because I will explain afterwards why I started giggling, and I'm blaming another author, Jennifer Blackwell, because I know what the weirdest thing she's had to find, like Google and found.
I think, I mean, it's probably just random stuff like how do you milk a goat, or like I had to look that one up the other day. Like, what is that experience like, or like different, like, what do male dragons look like? I mean, I'm trying to remember what I typed in or what I would type in.
Type in alligator. She writes urban fantasy, and she had to do something involving dragons and alligators.
Like she typed in alligators,
and she managed alligator attention, erection.
All right. Family-friendly radio, Cisca.
That was a medical term.
Ladies.
That was a medical term. It's scientific.
I have never had to do that one.
So when I used to write at a coffee shop before all the
Apparently
world
rather
happened.
traumatizing.
And you can always tell where I'm writing by the names, because it's like I'll look at what's around me. So when I was at the coffee shop, there's a lot of coffee names. I always fix that in post, because it make me want more coffee if I did that all the time. But and my first editor had sent me back a bunch of corrections. He's like, this is, if you're fighting someone this way, this is not what would medically happen to the human body. So you need to do a little bit of research and get back. I'm like, well, my aunt's an ER nurse. Let me call her. So I'm sitting there at the Starbucks talking about what would happen if you cut off limbs and heads and stuff. And all the people are just slowly scooting away from me, and I didn't quite notice it. And the next thing I look up, and there's a police officer there, and he's like, is there something you need to tell me, sir? And I'm like, oh, it's okay. I'm an author. And he's like, oh, okay. And apparently his wife wrote active romance novels. And he's like, if you're not on at least one government watch list, you're not doing it right as an author.
He actually like approached you. Like he actually
said, they called the cops. They thought I was planning a murder.
No way. That's an awesome story.
Yeah, I didn't even clue in like that was what was going on until afterwards. And I was calling my mom. I'm like, this guy interrupted my writing. So I'm like 500 words short because they thought you were planning a murder. Like, oh, I was clueless. It went right over my head.
You're like, oh, what? Is there something wrong with this conversation? Officer? My husband is like, there will be times I'll look up and be like, I need to kill someone with a cudgel. Or like I talk to him like, I need to kill this person, or what's this? Or like, I'll come up with some random question that he's like, what? Like, I'm like, don't ask.
I had that happen with so we mentioned that Nick is a
the don't ask, don't tell policy that authors have. It has nothing to do with preferences of people and gender and everything to do with things like that.
Yeah.
Because Nick was a ranger and he was a sniper and he's a cop, so I've reached out to him a couple times since we met him for like knife fighting. Goes, wait a minute, am I helping you as an author, or am I about to go to jail for helping you plan a murder? Because I kind of need to know what I'm packing for. I'm like, oh no, I promise it's going in a book.
I had in one of my romance books, I have this like scene where like police officers talking to dispatch, and my husband was working. And so I just like copied it and I sent it to him on Telegram. And I was like, tell me what you think. Like, does this? And so he's like critiquing it. I was like, no, like, is this what a cop would say to dispatch? And like, how would dispatch respond? And he was like, oh yeah, no, that's good. Here, change it. I sent him this random passage of a romance book. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was awesome.
It's good that he's so on the spot with that. So obviously this is winding down. We've been here for an hour. So is there anything that you want to tell us about Flame or the Dragon Master trilogy that we didn't ask you?
I think the cool thing about Flame, like if your listeners are gonna go and read it, and I can give them like a special deal, we'll set them up. But I love it when my readers actually clue into the deeper thematic elements that happen. So just like in the network series, when I realized I was processing my life like as this special forces wife and what that would entail, I was doing it through my story. I was also processing like a lot of things through Flame, Flight, and Freedom that ended up speaking into like really deeper themes. My FedEx guy is actually reading it right now, and every time he drops off my like Blue Apron box, he like goes into like all these themes that he's picking up on, and I've been shocked that he's actually nailing it like on the head. Like that was exactly what I wanted. So I think if you can go into it just like thinking about that and kind of some deeper themes and what they mean, the Dragon Master trilogy actually becomes this entirely different experience. And I'm not gonna name the themes because it's been different for depending on the person, but I think that's a really fun way to go into the book.
I will say I've been rereading a book series that I read as a teen, and it was an adult book series, but it's very different reading it as an adult. Like I have an entirely new perspective on it, but I'm also amazed at how much that series affected how I think about so many other things, and I never noticed.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So with themes, there's the theme that whatever the author might have intended, and that maybe comes through, maybe doesn't if we did our job right. But then it always like you're meeting the reader halfway, so it's what they're bringing into it as well.
Yeah.
So it's always amazing, especially because I was an English major in college, and I heard some of those pretentious professors be like, "No, he absolutely meant this, and these blue curtains meant blah." And I'm like, maybe he just liked the color blue, and the curtains had to go there, you know?
Seriously.
So
I told you why my teacher wouldn't let me talk about the Oedipus Rex cycle, right? I told you that one.
you can tell me off air because this is a family-friendly show.
I felt that the author was just trying to get laid.
Probably true, but we're trying to keep this PG-13.
They are trying so hard.
Somebody has to.
So how about this? So are these books out in audio? Because that's mostly where I do my reading. I'm going to check Flame out.
Yeah. You can actually get the Flame audiobook for free if you want it.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And then so rather than have to put something on the website that might leak out, so how about this? If they reach out to you, because I'm going to list your contact information and say, hey, we heard about this book through this podcast appearance, then whatever deal you want to give them, you can surprise them, because obviously that could potentially change, and that makes it easier on you. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's totally fine. Just tell them to reach out, and we'll hook them up with an ebook.
We just told them.
Yeah.
It's funny how that works. All right. Speaking of telling them, can you tell us, Katie, how listeners and readers and viewers can find you?
Yeah. So if you want to look at all my fantasy books, that's katiecrossbooks.com. You can get them all there. They're normally like $2 to $3 off what they are on the retailer, because you can buy them directly through me, or we're on any retailers. And if you want to get a free copy of Flame, just email me at kcrosswriting@gmail.com or katie@kcrosswriting.com.
JR.
Muted boomer. I know. I give Walt a hard time about that all the time, and he's not gonna let me forget it. All right, so you can find us on our website at anchor.fm/blasters tack and tack blades, anchor.fm/blasters tack and tack blades. Our Twitter is twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Sometimes we even check it. We have a Blasters and Blades podcast group on Facebook at facebook.com/Blasters and Blades podcast. And if you want to throw some funds in the tip jar to keep the lights on, it's buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. And remember to mention in the comments, it's for the podcast. Wow, I saw you dancing. Do I need a little bit of music when I'm reading that?
I'm not. I'm agreeing with you. I'm editorializing. I don't know, something.
All right.
Seeing if anybody notices the weird things I do in the background. Thank you for just spending your precious time with us. On behalf of our comic guy, Nick Garber, J.R. Handley, I'm Cisca, and this was the Blasters and Blade podcast. We will be back next time where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, fantasy, magic, and all things that go boom.
All right.